My name is Ava. I'm 16. And I still remember the exact sound the hallway made that morning before everything cracked open. The usual buzz of students, the lockers slamming, the murmur of gossip just beneath the surface. It felt like any other day. I had my headphones in, half listening to music and half watching the light bounce off the linoleum tiles as I walked past the office where my mother worked. She was the school counselor, respected, trusted, admired. She smiled at me through the glass as she always did, with that quiet warmth only a mom could give. That was the last time school felt safe, or normal. By third period, something had shifted. A weird tension rolled through the hallways like fog. People whispered. A few teachers looked panicked. Then the announcement. A student from my grade, Harper, had been rushed to the hospital after being found unresponsive in the girls' restroom. The halls fell completely silent. That never happens in a high school. Phones buzzed. Faces froze. Some kids cried. I didn't understand the weight of it yet. I only remember clutching the edge of my desk and watching the teacher leave the room with trembling hands. When I finally saw my mom during lunch, she looked pale, shaken. She didn't say much, just held on to her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Rough day," she muttered. I didn't ask more. I should have. I didn't know that she had been the last person to speak to Harper that morning. I didn't know that conversation would become the axis around which everything would spin out of control. That it would be twisted, blamed, buried. The next day, Harper was gone. Dead. That word hit the school like a punch to the ribs. Everyone moved slower, talked softer. But beneath that surface grief, something else began to grow. Suspicion. Whispers that someone had failed her, that someone had ignored the signs, that someone was supposed to help. It didn't take long before the stares turned, not toward Harper's friends, not toward the teachers who should have noticed, but toward my mother. My mom, the counselor everyone once praised for her compassion, was now being talked about like a villain in hushed tones by the water fountain. It was surreal, like watching your life get rewritten in real time and not being able to stop it. That was the last week I ever felt invisible at school. After that, I was no longer Ava. I was the daughter of a counselor. I was the girl whose mom might have let someone die. And as ridiculous and cruel as that sounded to me, it was amazing how fast people believed it. The same students who used to laugh with me at lunch suddenly avoided me in the hallways. Even the teachers' eyes held something different now. Like they didn't know whether to pity me or fear me. I kept waiting for someone to speak up. For an adult to say, hey, maybe this isn't her fault. But no one did. Not that week. Not ever. And so, at 16, I learned something about silence. It's not always absence. Sometimes it's a choice. Sometimes it's louder than any lie, and I wasn't ready for how much louder it would get. I thought returning to school would help me forget that the routine, the noise, the distraction of it all would push away. The image of Harper's pale hand under the emergency blanket and the flashing red lights outside the building. But from the moment I walked through the gates, I realized school wasn't going to be an escape. It had become a stage, and everyone was acting. No one said anything to me directly, not at first, but the way people looked at me shifted. Not with sympathy, but with calculation, as if they were trying to figure out what I knew, what I might say, or whether I was somehow complicit. The air felt thick, like it had absorbed the weight of everything unsaid. In first period, someone had slipped a folded note onto my desk. No name, just one sentence. "Still think your mom's a hero?" I read it twice before crumpling it and shoving it into my pocket. I didn't cry. Not yet. By lunch, the whispers had evolved into full sentences. I heard it was the counselor. Apparently, she didn't report anything. Can't believe. She just let it happen. And then the one that hit hardest. Her mom talked to her that day. They didn't say my name, but they didn't have to. It was like watching a house you built get torn down brick by brick and being forced to stand there and pretend you weren't the one who laid the foundation. Everyone was so quick to believe it, as if all the years. My mom spent staying late, helping students after hours, giving up weekends for conferences and parent meetings. None of it mattered now. There was one moment that day that burned into my memory. It was after gym. I'd gone to the counselor's office, almost out of instinct, to pick up a form. The door was locked. A handwritten sign taped to the glass. "Read." Counselor unavailable until further notice. Her name wasn't even on the door anymore. It had been scraped off with something rough, like they couldn't wait to erase her completely. When I got home, she was still in her bathrobe. The lights were off. She'd moved from the bedroom to the living room, but she looked exactly the same as she had that morning, blank, hollow. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, refreshing her inbox again and again. I saw a message flash briefly across. The screen before she closed it, board meeting scheduled. Urgent. Neither of us spoke. Later that night, I overheard her on the phone with someone from the district. Her voice was low, brittle. "You know, this isn't right," she said. "You know, I did everything I was supposed to. I wanted to hug her, to tell her it would pass, that people would come to their senses. But even I wasn't sure anymore. Not because I thought she was guilty, never that, but because I knew how quickly people needed someone to blame. And it didn't matter who told the truth. It only mattered who looked most disposable." When I lay in bed that night, I checked my phone again. The article was everywhere now. Not just the small blog post. Bigger sites were picking it up. School counselor suspended after student tragedy. My mom wasn't named, but her position was clear. And in a town this small, that was all it took. Somewhere, someone had decided she was guilty enough to sacrifice. And deep down, I started to feel the cracks forming. Not just in how the school saw her, but in how they now saw me. By the next morning, I wasn't just the daughter of the school counselor anymore. I was the daughter of the woman everyone was blaming. The moment I stepped off the bus, I felt it. Not the usual silence that follows a tragedy, but different kind. Colder, more rehearsed. Like everyone had already decided where they stood. I didn't make it halfway to my locker before someone bumped into me on purpose. Hard. My books hit the floor, and I heard the words before I even saw who said them. "Your mom should be in jail." I looked up, but they were already walking away. The school had become a court, and my mother had been tried and convicted before any truth came out. In homeroom. No one sat next to me. I tried to keep my head down, focus on the page in front of me, but someone whispered, just loud enough, that she knew, that she helped her cover it up. My stomach twisted. When I got home that day, two things made my heart stop. First, the voicemail blinking on our landline. I never listened to those, but something told me I needed to. It was from a parent. No name, but their voice was sharp, venomous. "We trusted you with our children, and now one of them is dead. I hope you never work in a school again." My mom didn't say anything when I told her. She just walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Outside, two news vans were parked across the street. One had a camera aimed directly at our house. She let the curtain fall, and for a moment, I thought she might scream. Instead, she just whispered, "They don't even know the truth." But the truth didn't seem to matter. That night, the school principal made a statement on TV. A neat little speech, carefully written and practiced. He didn't say her name, but again, everyone already knew. "We are heartbroken," he said. "We are reviewing all procedures. Certain staff members have been suspended pending investigation." Suspended. Like she was some faulty piece of equipment they could unplug. And then came the emails, hundreds of them. Angry parents, board members demanding meetings, former students expressing disappointment. Some people she thought were friends, colleagues, people she mentored for years, had already begun to distance themselves. One of her old coworkers wrote, "I'm so sorry, but I need to protect my own position." You understand, right? I saw her reread that 3 times. She didn't cry, not then, but I could tell her silence was louder than any breakdown. The last thing I remember from that day was her sitting at the kitchen table, phone in one hand, wine glass in the other, staring at a blank Word document on her laptop. At the top of the page, one word, resignation. She hadn't even typed a sentence yet, and as I watched her hands hover over the keys, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't just losing her job. She was losing her identity, her purpose, the thing that made her feel like she mattered. And I didn't know how to save her from that dot. The next few days blurred into each other. But one thing was always sharp, how different everything felt. I went back to school hoping maybe things would calm down. Maybe people would realize we were just a family caught in something bigger. But I was wrong. So wrong. At lunch, I sat at the edge of the courtyard like I always had. Same table, same spot, but no one came. Not even Mia, my best friend since 6th grade. She walked past me with her tray and didn't even glance my way. When I finally got the courage to ask her what was going on, her voice was clipped and cold. My mom said it's better if we don't talk for a while. That phrase "for a while" rattled around in my chest, like a soft goodbye pretending not to be permanent. I tried telling myself it was just shock. People were grieving, processing, but it wasn't just friends. Teachers began looking through me. One called attendance and paused at my name before moving on without even waiting for a response. Another, Mr. Breen, who used to compliment my essays, handed back my paper without a word. I didn't even get a grade, just a red circle around the title with a question mark next to it. By the end of the week, someone had scratched words into my locker door. They weren't creative, just "Martyr's Kid" in angry, jagged lines. I stood there staring at it, feeling like it had been carved into my skin instead. A group of students laughed behind me, not even trying to be subtle. But the worst moment came the night of the school board meeting. My mom didn't want to go, said it wouldn't change anything, but I begged her. "They need to hear your side," I said. "They need to see you." She didn't even get 5 minutes. One by one, parents stood and called her careless, unfit, emotionally unstable. Some said she had ignored signs. Others accused her of being cold. One woman said, if she can't even help her own daughter make friends, how can she help anyone's kid with real problems? I wanted to scream, "That's not fair," but my voice stayed locked inside me. When the board called the vote to uphold her suspension, not a single hand raised in protest. Not even the teacher representative who once told me my mom had saved her from quitting during her first year. Afterward, my mom and I walked out in silence. We got into the car, shut the doors, and didn't even turn on the engine for a while. She stared straight ahead, fingers clenched on the steering wheel. "I gave everything to that school," she said finally. Everything. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? That it wasn't fair. That she didn't deserve it. Because the truth was, it didn't matter what she deserved. People had made up their minds. The story had been written, and we were no longer in control of it. Back home, she packed a small box of personal items from her office photos, books, a coffee mug I gave her when I was 10. I watched her wrap them gently, like they were breakable pieces of herself. And maybe they were. The next morning, I noticed something new on the kitchen table, a printed job listing for a bookstore clerk in a different town. Hours away. And right. Then I knew we weren't just leaving the school. We were leaving everything. She didn't say a word at breakfast. Just moved the eggs around on her plate, eyes glassy, hands trembling slightly. I don't think she slept at all. I did barely, but every time I woke up, I'd hear her footsteps pacing the kitchen or the soft click of her laptop keys in the living room. By morning, something had shifted. Something final. She didn't go into work that day. Didn't even call in. She just sat in front of her computer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, and then slowly started to type. I stood behind her in silence, reading each word as it formed. Effective immediately, I hereby resign from my position as guidance counselor at North Hill High School. It wasn't a resignation letter. It was a goodbye, a surrender, a quiet declaration that she had nothing left to fight with. I didn't cry, not then. I couldn't. My throat locked. My chest tightened. I just stood frozen like a shadow in the doorway, watching my mother give up on the one thing she loved more than anything outside of me. By noon, the car was packed. She didn't tell anyone where we were going. She didn't even tell me, not really. Just said, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knows us. That was all. And I didn't ask questions because I was too scared of the answers. We left that afternoon. I watched our house disappear in the rearview mirror. The same house where she used to help kids apply to college in the dining room, where she'd stay up late returning parent emails, where she hung every thank you card from former students on the wall like tiny badges of purpose. That wall was bare now. She'd taken them down the night before, one by one, and stuffed them into a shoebox. That shoebox sat in her lap the whole ride. She held it like it was alive, like letting go of it would mean letting go of herself. We drove for hours in silence. Only once did she speak while we passed a small roadside diner with flickering neon lights. "You think people can just start over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to say, because I wasn't sure if we were starting over or just running away. By nightfall, We pulled up to a cottage near a lake, a place I'd never seen before. It was small, quiet, tucked between thick pine trees and misty water. There was no Wi-Fi, barely any cell signal, just a gravel path, an old dock, and the scent of wet wood. She signed a lease that night, used a different last name, said it was for safety, for distance, for peace. And just like that, Ava and her mom were gone. We had become someone else. Somewhere else. The first night in that tiny cottage. I lay awake on a creaky mattress with cold sheets, staring at a ceiling stained by water damage. I listened to the wind outside, the soft rustling of trees, and the echo of my mom crying through the paper-thin walls. Not loud, just enough for me to hear. It was the sound of a woman who had spent her whole life lifting others, only to be crushed the moment she needed someone to lift her. The next morning. She made pancakes like she used to when I was little. She didn't smile, but she tried. We both tried. And in that moment, eating pancakes in a kitchen that wasn't ours, I realized something. This wasn't about starting over. This was about surviving. The first week in the new town felt like walking through fog. With stones in my pockets, everything was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you but reminds you how loud your thoughts have become. The cottage had peeling paint, crooked floorboards, and a front porch that creaked like it was sighing under the weight of the past we barely unpacked, just the essentials. The rest stayed sealed in boxes, like if we never opened them, our old lives might not seep through the cracks. School was strange. On the surface, it was nothing like Nordhill. Smaller, rural, the kind of place where kids grew up knowing each other since kindergarten. They didn't look at me like I was radioactive, but they didn't know what to do with me either. A transfer in the middle of the year always draws glances, but I was careful. I didn't speak unless I had to. I told no one my mom's name. No one knew she used to work in a school, used to help students find their voices. Now she barely used hers. She told the town she worked from home. Freelance editing, she said, the first time someone asked, and they nodded, accepting it like it made perfect sense. But I knew she hadn't opened her laptop in days. Not to work, just to scroll the same 3 new sites, searching for anything that might say her name had been cleared. But silence stretches when you're waiting for redemption. And sometimes it never comes. Nights were the hardest. I'd walk down the hallway to the kitchen for water and see her sitting at the small table, holding her old ID badge, just staring at it. Like maybe if she looked long enough, she'd remember what it felt like to be needed, trusted, human. I wanted to say something, to ask her to put it away, to sleep, to let it go, but I couldn't, because I was still staring too, at the bruises the past had left. Some on her, some on me. We didn't talk much about what happened. Only once after dinner, she asked me if I missed anyone. I told her the truth. Not anyone who mattered, but I did miss something. I missed who she used to be, who I used to be, before the whispers, before the cold stares, before the world decided we were better off erased. I joined a few school clubs just to look normal. Drama, yearbook. No one asked questions, and I kept it that way. But every time someone laughed too loudly near me or turned quickly in my direction, a voice in my head whispered, "They found out." Of course they hadn't. Not yet. But living in fear doesn't require proof. Just memory. One afternoon, after school, I walked home alone. Leaves crunched beneath my shoes. The lake glittered with soft gold from the setting sun. It should have felt peaceful, but all I felt was watched. I stopped in the middle of the path and turned. No one. Still, the chill didn't go away. When I got back, I found my mom staring out the front window. Not at the lake, not at the trees. At nothing. Just empty space. Like she was bracing for something to return. I placed a hand on her shoulder gently. She flinched. That was new. We didn't speak that evening. We just sat on the couch, silent, movie playing in the background, while the sky outside darkened to a deep, unknowable blue. We had new names now, but the wounds? They followed. Not healed, just hidden, waiting for the moment when someone might tear the bandages off, and deep down, we both knew. That moment was coming. It happened on a Sunday, quiet and gray, a kind of day where time moves slowly and everything feels suspended. My mom was in the kitchen, stirring something she wasn't going to eat. I was in the living room with a book I wasn't really reading. The quiet had settled around us again like fog, thick and unmoving, until the sharp burst of light cut through it like a blade. A flash dot, just one. I froze. My first thought was lightning, but there was no storm, no thunder. Then I heard the faint crunch of gravel outside. I crept toward the front window and peeked through the side, careful not to be seen. There was a man standing at the gate, not close enough to make out clearly, but something about him tightened every muscle in my body. He was holding a phone, still pointed toward the house. He was tall, wearing a brown coat that looked too familiar. The collar up, the posture straight. My pulse quickened. Something deep inside me said I knew him, even if my brain couldn't quite place it yet. And then he turned. For a split second, our eyes met. Even through the glass and the distance, I could feel it. The recognition, the awareness. His gaze wasn't random. He was looking for someone. He had found us, and then, just as quickly, he walked away back down the dirt road that led toward the highway. I didn't breathe for what felt like a full minute. When I finally turned back, my mom was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, eyes wide, lips slightly parted. She'd seen the flash too. "Did you see who it was?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I shook my head. No, but he was watching us. She didn't say anything, just walked slowly to the window and stood there for a long time, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. That night, we didn't sleep. We double-checked the locks, closed the blinds, and turned off every light. My mom sat in the armchair with her phone in her hand like a weapon, while I lay on the couch with a blanket pulled up to my chin, wide awake, ears tuned to every creak and groan of the old house. In the morning, I went out to the front gate. I pretended to be picking up fallen branches, but really I was looking for footprints, tire marks, any trace of him. There was nothing. No sign he'd ever been there. But I knew better. Later that day, something clicked. That coat, the brown coat. It was the same one the principal used to wear during morning assemblies back at Nordhill. The same one I'd seen 100 times in the front row of school board meetings. The same coat that smelled like expensive cologne and old secrets. It was him. Why was he here? Why now? I wanted to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that maybe he'd been passing through. But people don't pass through towns like ours, especially not former school administrators with a past they'd rather leave buried. When I told my mom what I suspected, she went pale, sat down, put her head in her hands. "He must have followed us," she said quietly. "He must have found us through some file, some address I forgot to change." "But why?" I asked. "Why now?" She didn't answer, but her eyes were full of something I hadn't seen in a long time, fear. And for the first time since we left everything behind, I wondered if running was ever enough, because the past doesn't knock. It waits. And then it flashes through your window when you least expect it. We didn't talk about it for days after that. The visit, if I could, even call it, that hung over the house like a thundercloud no one wanted to admit was there. My mom barely spoke. I caught her triple checking the locks at night, sometimes just sitting near the front door like she was waiting for a second knock. I tried to push it out of my head, but everything started shifting again. The stillness we built here wasn't still anymore. Then something strange happened. I was online late one night, scrolling through old school forums out of some twisted sense of curiosity, or maybe just insomnia. I clicked into a thread that hadn't been updated in months. It was buried under hundreds of others, titled with nothing more than Nordhill, what really happened. At first, I thought it was another parent venting. But as I read, my skin started to crawl. The post wasn't from a parent. It was from someone who worked at the school. A teacher. Didn't use their real name. But the details, the language, the dates. It was all too accurate to be fake. They talked about what happened to the girl, how she'd gone to the school administration multiple times. How she'd reported a faculty member, not my mom. How she begged to be taken seriously. But instead of investigating, the principal buried the reports. They wrote that when the situation reached a boiling point, the school needed someone to blame, someone visible, someone the students trusted, someone who wouldn't fight back, someone like my mom. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking. There was a file attached to the last comment in the thread. I clicked it before I could think twice. It opened to a grainy photo of a document, internal communications from the school board. The name of the actual accused faculty member was blacked out, but there, in bold at the top, was a line that said, "We believe a temporary diversion of blame may preserve the institution's image." My mom's name was scribbled in the margin. I ran into her room without knocking. She was asleep, or at least pretending to be. I shoved the screen in front of her face. "Read this," I said. "Please." She sat up slowly, took the laptop from me, and started to read. Her eyes widened with every line, her face paling in the glow of the screen. And then she started crying, not like the quiet kind I'd seen before. This was different. Messy, loud. Years of being told to hold it all and coming out at once. She just kept whispering. "I told them the truth. I told them the truth. And now we had proof. But what were we supposed to do with it?" I expected her to want revenge, to scream at the screen, to call a lawyer, to burn the whole system down. But instead, she just closed the laptop and looked at me like she'd finally woken up from a nightmare. "They ruined everything," she said softly, "but they don't get to take today." We didn't sleep that night either. In the morning, she printed the documents, not to send to the news, not to send to a lawyer, just to have them, to hold in her hands something that proved she wasn't crazy, that what happened to us wasn't some unfortunate accident or misunderstanding. It was calculated, strategic, cruel. I started looking more into that teacher, the one who posted. I still don't know who they were, but they weren't the only one. Other people started commenting, sharing stories, talking about the same faculty member, the same cover-ups. Some of them even remembered my mom and how none of it ever felt right. One comment simply read, "She was the only adult who ever listened to me, and they destroyed her for it." That one made her cry again. But this time, I think it hurt less. The past didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like evidence. A puzzle we were finally solving, one jagged piece at a time. And outside, beyond the fog and the trees and the gravel road that led away from us, I wondered if the man in the coat knew we'd figured it out. Because the truth wasn't buried anymore. And sometimes the quietest voices end up echoing the loudest. A few days later, as I was walking back from the mailbox, I noticed something strange. Among the usual stack of utility bills and catalogs we never ordered, there was a cream-colored envelope with no return address. My name wasn't on it. Just hers, my mom's name, handwritten in careful, slanted cursive. The paper looked old, like it had been sitting in someone's drawer for months, waiting for the courage to be mailed. I handed it to her in the kitchen, curious but not thinking much of it. She held it in her hand for a long time before opening it, as if she already knew it was going to matter. I watched her eyes move across the page, then she went completely still. The kind of stillness where your breath catches without you realizing it. I asked her what it said, and she just passed it to me, WORDLESSLY. It was from one of the school board members. Not the principal, not the superintendent, but someone who had been in the room, someone who had signed the papers, nodded in the meetings, and stayed silent when they knew better. The letter was long, almost rambling in parts, like it had been rewritten many times before being sent. But one sentence burned into me immediately. "You were the easy option." He admitted it all. How the board had panicked when the press started circling. How the pressure from certain parents and donors demanded a clean resolution. How the teacher the girl had accused had tenure, a protected contract, and powerful allies. And how, in the board's eyes, my mother, with her soft reputation and calm voice, made a perfect scapegoat. "It wasn't personal," the letter said. "It was strategic, and it was wrong." He said he carried the guilt for a year, that he'd wanted to come forward sooner, but was afraid of losing his pension, his standing, his reputation. That reading the anonymous leaks online finally broke whatever loyalty he had left. And that he hoped this letter, even if it changed nothing, might help my mom sleep again. It didn't bring justice. It didn't bring back her job or our old house or the life we left behind. But it brought something else. Something we hadn't felt in over a year. Validation. I remember my mom folding the letter carefully, not tearing it up or throwing it away, just pressing it flat and sliding it into the drawer where she kept our passports and important documents. I asked her why she wasn't more upset. Why? She wasn't screaming or calling reporters or suing everyone with a title. She looked at me and said, "Because I don't need them to suffer." I just needed someone to admit I wasn't crazy. That night, she took her old school ID badge and placed it next to the letter. Not to mourn it, but to give it its proper place. For the first time, she didn't look at it with longing or regret. She looked at it like a closed chapter. And I realized something else. It wasn't just her name that had been cleared. It was mine too. Because when your parent is accused, people don't just whisper about them, they whisper about you. They wonder what kind of daughter you must be, what kind of family you come from. But this letter, this quiet confession from someone who had once watched her burn and said nothing, it gave us both something. We thought we'd lost forever. The right to hold our heads up again. We didn't go public. We didn't post it online. Not because we wanted to protect the board or the school, but because we wanted to protect ourselves. We were tired of being defined by other people's mistakes, and sat on the porch that night with hot tea and no words, just the sound of wind and the trees and a quiet kind of peace between us. Not closure exactly, but something close, a beginning maybe, or at least an end to the silence. That evening, the sky was painted with streaks of orange and rose, the kind of sunset you only get at the edge of a lake in early fall. My mom sat in the old wicker chair on our porch, legs tucked under her. That letter folded neatly in her lap like a forgotten photograph. I sat beside her sipping lukewarm tea, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we weren't just surviving, we were breathing. There had been so many nights before this, where I'd lie awake replaying every moment from that awful year. The looks, the whispers. The day my mom stopped being the counselor and became the accused. I used to fantasize about revenge, some dramatic exposure where everyone who hurt us would be forced to apologize, humiliated the way we were. I thought we needed it. But now with the truth laid bare in that letter, something shifted. We didn't need revenge. We needed the truth, and now we had it. A few days later, something strange happened. We saw him. The principal. It was a Friday morning, chilly enough to see your breath. I was headed out to my new school, where no one knew what had happened, when I saw a car I didn't recognize parked just across from our house. A man leaned against the driver's side, holding his phone, pretending to scroll. But I knew that coat. I knew that profile. I knew the way he never looked directly at you, but always just past you, like he was deciding whether you were useful. He didn't move when he saw me. He just stared. Not at me, not even at the house, but at my mom, who had stepped out onto the porch behind me. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She stood there in her old gray sweater, arms crossed, watching him like he was a strange animal that had wandered too close to her garden. He didn't say a word, just got in his car and drove away. We never saw him again. Maybe he came looking for something, an explanation, a chance to justify what he did. Maybe he wanted to see the damage and was surprised to find none. Or maybe the look on my mother's face reminded him that he hadn't won, that all the public statements, the meetings, the lies, they hadn't broken her, because here she was, still standing, still teaching me how to live without bitterness, still making blueberry pancakes on Sundays and humming while she watered the plants, still sending quiet strength out into the world, even after it had tried to crush her. I think about that moment sometimes, and how easily our story could have ended with silence. But we didn't vanish. We chose to rebuild, not loudly, not for applause, just for ourselves. My mom never applied for another job in a school. Instead, she started offering free counseling sessions to women in our town, people who felt invisible, people who were blamed for things they didn't do, people like her, like Astat and I. I stopped being afraid of my last name, of walking into a room and wondering what people had heard. I started telling this story not for drama and not for sympathy, but because some stories deserved to be told. What they did to us was cruel, but we didn't let it define us. They took our home, our community, our dignity for a while, but they didn't take our peace. That's something we claimed for ourselves. In a cottage by the lake with letters folded in drawers and wounds that finally stopped bleeding. And if he ever comes back, if he ever thinks he still holds power over us, he'll find only silence, because we don't live in the shadow of what they did anymore. We live in the light of what we survived.